Wonderful introducer there. I had no idea that there were 43,000 members of the Georgia Realtors Association and doing important work there. And we certainly appreciate your sponsorship today. Well, folks, Sean put me up to telling a story that I haven't told in ages, but used to tell all the time to introduce my lectures. And the story, I'll summarize it, but it goes like this. Back in the day, back when I was a much younger person, I would often go backpacking, and I'm backpacking along in the Grand Teton Mountains of Wyoming. It's getting near the end of the day, so I pull off the trail. I pitch my tent, make a little supper, and having some daylight left, I decided I'd check out the neighborhood, so to speak. So I hiked across this meadow and hiked down the side of the mountain there, and I saw this gorgeous sunset. I mean, it was absolutely stunning. And after taking it in, I got up to go back to my tent. I headed back to that meadow, and lo and behold, I could hear a moose. I'm not making this up. There was an angry moose. I never saw him, but he was down in there crashing around and making the most gosh awful noise. And so I just let him do his thing. And finally, I had a chance to traverse that meadow back over to where I thought my tent would be, and I'll just find it and go to sleep and everything's great. But it's pitch black dark by the time I get there, and I cannot see my hand in front of my face. I know my tent has got to be right in this little neighborhood of pine trees, but no such luck. So finally I give up. I sleep, or try to sleep, under a pine tree. It was middle of summer, so I was in no danger of freezing to death, but definitely got my attention. In the morning when I finally got up, the sun comes up, I looked around and of course there's my tent 30 feet away. And I always use that because if I'd simply had a flashlight, if I'd simply remembered to take my flashlight along, I would not have been in that situation. And so what this session about, what this next hour is about, and we're going to move pretty fast here, is about your flashlight. I call this presentation Seeing What's Next. And are you able to see my screen now? Or I think I need to share the screen first. Okay, here we go. So yes, we're going to talk about 4 strategies for seeing what's next, for seeing into the future here a bit, and shaping our post-pandemic future, all with an eye toward helping you to step up your game, to become indispensable during this very troublesome time. So that's a pretty tall order. So let's get started. Let's look at this first strategy. The first strategy I want to talk with you about is we need to do a little bit of an assessment today. It's time. We're 6 or 8 months into this pandemic, this crisis, and it's time to do a little reflection, a little introspection. So use this session for that purpose, right? Where do you sit in today's world? Not where you expected that you would be, not where you'd hoped you'd be, but where you actually are, vis-a-vis the pandemic and so forth. So that's number 1. You know, my work has been over the last 30 years to work with a lot of companies that want to get better at innovation. And in the course of that, quite a number of them were facing what we call disruption. There's no secret. The last decade was characterized by a sudden outbreak of disruption. Disrupting organizations, disrupting individual lives. This is my list of the no longer with us crowd. But I mean, Kodak, what were they thinking? Why didn't they see it coming? They invented the digital camera. That was their undoing. Blockbuster, we all talk about these companies. Radio Shack, I used to love to go to Radio Shack to pick up electronic goods. They became irrelevant. Everything that, where's my smartphone? Everything that you used to go to Radio Shack to buy is now on your iPhone, right? Your smartphone. So some of you are looking down there and going, milk has been disrupted, cows have been disrupted. Yes, it is true. Look in your refrigerator if you don't believe me. Almond milk, right? I had breakfast this morning, oat milk. I mean, who knew that seeds had udders? It's just incredible, right? So we didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming. And the question is why? And the question is, can we see it coming if we change how we take in information, how we perceive and take in the world? And I believe we can in most cases. Not all, but most cases. Take a look. In 2006, Nokia was considered the 8th most innovative company in the world. They were unstoppable. And that year they asked me to lead 50 of their high potential managers at a leadership conference in Palo Alto, California. I was delighted. And to prepare for that, I did what we did with GEDA, and some of you, thank you for filling out that survey. It was invaluable to me. But one of the questions I asked these Nokia high potential leaders from all over the world was, one of the questions was, what are the barriers to innovation that you perceive in this organization? And I got to tell you, I half expected that they would say, well, hey, you know, we're Nokia here, but we don't have barriers. You know, we're innovative. But instead, imagine my surprise when I got this list. Right? These look like pretty much any other company that I might work with. Legacy business slows change. We're risk averse. We little budget freedom to experiment and so forth. And I'll never forget the meeting itself in Palo Alto. I asked the group, I said, if I work for you and I have an idea, what do you want me to do with it? Guy stood up. He said, Mr. Tucker, I would just tell you to forget about it. You're just going to beat your head against the wall. You're never going to get any. I got to admit, there were a few gasps around the room. They knew it wasn't politically correct to reveal this to a stranger. But I think this man was speaking his truth. Well, I crossed it off as an anomaly. I remember I was headed to Bogota the next day. It was a particularly busy period of time, but I did sort of say, you know, whoa, this was kind of incongruent here with what the public perceives and what was actually going on in terms of their being stymied by their barriers in terms of getting to the future successfully. And then a year later, Apple introduced the smartphone, the iPhone. And sure enough, Nokia began its spectacular fall from grace. And I thought back to that meeting in Palo Alto. I thought back to these barriers that you're looking at here on your screen. And I saw a connection there, right? And if we were to summarize what was going on there, one word I would use would be denial. And I want to talk to you about that in reference to what we are facing at this very moment, a global pandemic, a socio-political and climatological, that's a mouthful, change, disruption, if you will, and an economic recession that some are calling a depression. Let's take these one by one briefly. We just reached a very sad milestone. Over 200,000 of our fellow Americans have perished from this pandemic. Cases are still spiking. There is a growing consensus that the US fundamentally failed. And we're not used to failure. 30 million cases, and yes, there is a little light at the end of the tunnel. The CDC is saying that the United States should have enough vaccine to return to regular life by the third quarter of 2021. So this time next year, you'll be having this meeting back face-to-face, live. The economic indicators, the economic implications of this, we're headed into a global depression, according to some economists, GDP, so forth and so on. GDP is not expected to catch up to previous levels until about almost 10 years from now. Let's look at it from a socio-political and climatological standpoint as well. We are seeing mass protests. We are seeing a divided electorate that is more divided. If we were to sort of helicopter up over this thing called the United States of America and objectively describe what's going on, if any of you have been watching on Netflix, it's called The Social Dilemma. I highly recommend it. It is about the implications of artificial intelligence on our human behavior. And it is very concerning. Growing consensus that the US, that our democracy may be at an end. This was also the case during the Great Depression. There was talk that our democracy may be ending, so it's not without precedent. Our mental health is going down the tubes. Doubling over the last 25 years of people saying that they're having a bad mental health day. And then finally, most disturbing to me, and perhaps to you in the realm of community development, of economic development, is how we're falling on this ranking of our social indicators. You know, we think of America as #1 and so forth, but we have dropped. When they started this about 10 years ago, doing this objective assessment of nations, we were at, I think, number 11 or 12. And we just dropped on the latest one to 29th place. And they rate quality of life issues such as you can see on the screen here, a variety of things. What's going on? Well, Michael Porter, the esteemed Michael Porter at Harvard, says the data paint an alarming picture of the state of our nation, and we hope it will be a call to action. It's like we are a developing country. Now, we Americans are used to being #1. We do not like things like this. If you perceive me as somebody who is here to motivate you, you may be saying, why are you wasting my time on this bad news? There's enough going on, right? But in respect to what we just saw with Nokia and those disrupted companies, and my experience in helping organizations to confront the brutal facts, whatever they may be, that's why I want to share this type of thing with you. It's absolutely essential that we do this assessment, that we understand where we are in today's world, and then only then can we move ahead. Jack Welch, the former chairman of General Electric, said it this way. I love this definition of strategy. Apply it to yourself as I read it, please. A strategy is trying to understand where you sit in today's world, not where you wish you were, not where you hoped you'd be, but where you are. It's trying to understand where you want to be 5 years out and assessing the realistic chances of getting there. So that's where we're at. And that's why we need to reset our strategy. All right, so number 2 here. Number 2 is that we treat this crisis as an inflection point. What is an inflection point? An inflection point is a word, a concept that was promulgated by Andrew Grove of Intel. He was one of the 3 founders of Intel, and there was a period of time during Intel's early development that they really had to abandon a whole new product line for that company, and go off and innovate a whole new product line. Because if they didn't do that, they were going to, achieve catastrophic decline. But they bit the bullet and they did it. And he invented this term called strategic inflection point. And that's where we are today, both personally in many cases, professionally, in our organizations, in our economic development groups, in the companies, in the power companies that are on this call, the energy companies that are on this call. America, the world, you and I are at an inflection point, whether we see it that way or not. History tells us this is an inflection point. So the question is, what kind of decisions are we making? Are we making creative decisions? Are we making forward-thinking decisions? Or are we immobilized? Are we in a state of denial as we make those decisions? So that's what I want to wrestle with you. I came across this quote. You get a lot of information coming across your desk, and I just had to grab this one because I said this is important. Some writer, some blogger named David Hollis. I've never met him, but he said something that just stopped me in my tracks. He said, in the rush to return to normal, this was back in March, April, right? Use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth rushing back to. Wow, that's a keeper. I can just figure out how to advance my slides. Cataclysmic events. If you look back in history, they presage inflection points where people need to make decisions, creative and tough decisions, but decisions nevertheless. You take, for example, World War II, the Great Depression, September 11th. You take the global financial crisis of 10 years ago. You take, back to the 14th century, the bubonic plague or the Black Death. People would die by the scores, so many deaths. I mean, a third of the population, right? Just physicians would be treating a patient, a person would go to bed at night and they would be dead. It was awful. I'm reading a book about it called A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman. It was a book written back in the 70s, a fantastic, well-researched book on the impact of this plague and pandemic. We know what happens after wars and even after terrorist attacks and so forth, but what gets unleashed after a pandemic? That's a little bit more undefined. And what historians see is that it unleashes a tremendous amount of fresh thinking, of openness, right? I mean, think about your own experience right now. Do you not hunger to get back out there and hug your fellow economic development people? You guys are such a loving group, if I can use that word. I mean, you're cooped up here. We're doing this by Zoom, and we're gonna make it work. And but pressing the flesh, being out with people, that unleashes our energy, right? As extroverts, and we can't do that right now. We're stymied. So when this thing is over, right? Boom! Plan on a huge wave there. And we need to shape the future. We need to understand why we're in this place of divisiveness and why we can't seem to get along as a country right now. And even some families, for example, that are having some pretty tough time. I say it's the difference between linear change that we're facing and exponential change that is characterized. Moore's Law is an example of exponential change. Gordon Moore, back at another one of the founders of Intel, 50 years ago or 40 years ago, let's say, saw that the rate of technological invention or innovation or capacity was doubling every 18 to 24 months. And that became known as Moore's Law. And since that time, we've seen a lot of doubling. And you know yourself, right? If things are doubling, they're going to zoom forward. And so what you see is this hockey stick to where we are here. Suddenly we're here, right? And it's uncomfortable. Alvin Toffler 50 years ago calls this state of anxiety, future shock. People are walking around shocked at how much change there's been. And so there's this great pressure, even before the pandemic. Can we go back here? Back when life was a little simpler, right? And so many people today are really trying to go back. And in some respects, they are, right? And we could get into that. I wish we had more time to kind of unpack that. But what I want to say about this is, for the most part, unlike that movie Back to the Future, we can't go back to the future. But what we can do, and why I am so excited to share with you and talk with you about this topic, is that we can shape the future. You see? Because if you look at history, it's always been about shaping the future. And leaders like yourselves, everybody on this call is a leader. And leaders like yourselves, you are shapers. That's what you do. That's why you're on this planet, right? You didn't just wander into this by accident. It's because you want to help shape a better future. And you look at all the great things that have happened in the state of Georgia to develop the economy. I mean, your port, your airports, your universities, your great universities, right? Every one of those things started by somebody saying, I want to shape the future this way, educationally, right? And what you do on a daily basis, when you go out and you meet with companies, and you see what their needs are and their workforce needs and all that, what you do when you create jobs like that is you are shaping the future. So it's a vital thing that you do. It's great. I'm a great lover of history. I have to say that whenever I'm in the home of one of these innovators that I have the great privilege and honor of visiting with and getting to know in the course of the work that I do, these CEOs and in the non-sector, invariably we'll pass by, with a glass of wine in the hand and oh, here's my study, and oh, can I take a look at, and I always want to go over and take a look at their books. And you know what I find? I find that great leaders are great historians. They love history. They love biography. And I was reading the other day, Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on leadership in turbulent times. And she talked about Franklin Roosevelt waking up one day with massive paralysis in his body, excruciating pain. I mean, here was this successful guy and just going places, shot from a cannon every day, and suddenly he's immobilized and in pain. It seems to be all over. And you know what he did? He had the good sense to seek out, where can I best go and heal my body? He went to Warm Springs, Georgia. This is back in the early 20s, right? And for months, he did physical therapy. They didn't call it that then, but physical therapy, PT, day after day, and made really no improvement. But after, oh gosh, I don't know how many months it was, finally he started feeling a little better, a little stronger. And Roosevelt being Roosevelt, he's more concerned about other people that are there to be treated for polio, right? And in Warm Springs. And he starts doing all these innovative things, and it helps him to heal. And he never overcame polio completely. I remember a description of him trying to get up to do his inaugural address, and it was still so excruciating, right? But he just grinned and just bared it, right? And but it was that experience that prepared him to see that within crises are the seeds of opportunity. And so in the early 30s, in 33, I believe he took office, he saw it as a similar challenge to help the United States of America. But things were on a precipice there. The banks were failing. People were failing. Everything was going down the tubes. It was a miserable period of time. But he started innovating and he started spreading hope, right? And that's what we got to do. What mode of thinking are you operating in? That's the question that I always diplomatically want to get at. You know, we have individual sort of mindsets, if you will, moods, we sometimes call them. Companies do, organizations do. Before the pandemic, I was working not too long ago with a company in Ohio, a Fortune 500 company, and they do call centers. I will not mention any names, that's not important. They're in the call center business. And shortly after I arrived, my host said something that was just, you know, because of what I do, a showstopper. I just glommed it, there it was, right? Like a pull quote in an article. He said to me, you know, Robert, you got to know something about our industry. Call centers are a commodity. Oh, nothing we can do, guys. Handcuffed. Look at the thinking there. Now, maybe that's true. You know, maybe that's in fact true. But what we have to do is peel the layers of the onion. We got to get at our thinking here. And let's do that in very short-handed fashion. Are you in defeatist mode today? We've all been there. Hey, man, I'm telling you. It is part of being a human being. Stuff happens. It can temporarily waylay us, throw us off our game. Our idea factory is shut down. It is a worried state. Worry is a negative use of the imagination. And what we need to do, of course, as soon as we can, is to shake it off. Invite ourselves into opportunity mode. Now let's take these other two just very, very briefly in the interest of time. But they're equally and very vitally important. Now, dreamer mode, you may be thinking, well, this guy's an innovation coach. He must want me to get into dreamer mode. And yes, we've got to honor this mode of thinking. But it's different than opportunity mode or innovator mode. Why? Because so often it's just fantasy. Now, it's important to have a vision. A vision of how you want your life to be over here, right? How you want your organization to be. Even if you're in charge of a certain function within your organization, how you want that to manifest. But a lot of times what happens is people will get caught up in this mode and never execute. And that's the basic difference here. Opportunity mode is can do. Opportunity mode is, as my old man used to say when we were working on the farm there in South Carolina growing up, he'd say, the impossible just takes us a little longer. That's opportunity mode. That's can do. That's what's gotten you all in your economic development functions to where you are. Sustainer mode, hey, if I'm in sustainer mode, I go in a meeting and somebody floats an idea, yeah, I'll shoot it down. I'll find a way to kill it. I want to sustain the status quo. I'm too busy. I've got too much on my plate. I am not interested in innovating. That's sustainer mode. That's not going to get us out of the hole here. Let's move on. Okay, so I want to get into this next one by just looking at this notion of not seeing it coming vis-a-vis the pandemic, right? Because I think it's instructive of what we're going to talk about in this next strategy. The fact is, if we unpack this a little bit, I mean, I didn't see it coming. I've got a list I'm going to show you in just a moment of the 20 driving forces of change that are going to characterize the 2020s. And pandemic was not on there. But it was on Bill Gates's radar. He predicted in a TED Talk in 2015 that it would be not missiles or bombs or explosions that would do us in, but a microbe. Nobody listened. There was a book called The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett predicting this. And as more information has come out on this slide was actually created in March or April, we see that a lot of people saw it coming, but mistakes were made, let's just say that. And now we are where we are, the country with the biggest problem. But what we're talking about here is using strategic foresight tools to see ahead of the curve, to spot these kinds of things so that we're not blindsided, so that we don't end up like Nokia and all of the other disrupted companies or disrupted nations. What is strategic foresight? It's the hottest area of all right now. Companies are saying, hey, what do we need to do to prepare for the next crisis like this, for the next opportunity like this as well? It's the act of reading signals, tracking trends, examining scenarios of possible futures, and forecasting what will happen and what will be needed in the future. I love what the hockey player Wayne Gretzky once said. He said, when asked why he was so successful, he said, I skate to where the puck will be, not to where it has been. Peloton Corporation, skating to where the puck will be, not where it has been. One technique I would want to share with you is this notion that we can futurize our thinking in an instant. Now, you all are in knee-deep into occupations, what occupations will be needed, what kinds of skills will be needed in your area of Georgia, and so forth. But with the general audience, I would urge them to futurize their thinking by sharing an example with them. Now, these occupations are going to go away over the next decade. Some pretty much already have, right? Despite our better efforts to save the coal mining jobs, they're going away. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal last week about this. You can't fight the trend. But what you can do is futurize your thinking. Let's say that your best friend, your neighbor, your son or daughter comes to you and says, hey, you know, you're in economic development. I need some advice here. And you say, well, what kind of advice do you need? They say, well, I am thinking about investing in this $5,000 course to become a home appraiser. What do you think? And what I want you to do is to say, well, let's do a little research. And you spin around and you type in Google, what is disrupting home appraisers? Or what could disrupt home appraisers, right? Type in something like that. And what you will find is that the profession of home appraisal is in massive disruption. There may be no need for home appraisers at all in 10 years. By doing just a little bit of research, you'll discover that artificial intelligence is being used by Zillow and other top lenders to replace humans. And that trend is probably going to continue. What you just did in doing a little research there was to futurize your thinking. You know, I'm lucky to have a spouse whose family is, they're like hugely futuristic in their thinking in a very practical way or in a very fun way, I would say. For example, I'll pass by and she'll be talking to a large, very large family out here in California, and they communicate all the time. And so they'll be talking about, our trip to Hawaii next summer or even the summer after that, and they'll go, now, do you think we should go to the Luau on Thursday night or should we go on Friday night? I'm going, man, my family, like we'd say, hey, it's Friday. Let's go to the drive-in theater and take in a movie. Very spontaneous, not very future focused, right? So I've learned this. I have appreciated this because folks that futurize tend to have more fun. These occupations will be in need of millions of workers. People say, oh, these jobs are disappearing. This is all terrible. The world's coming to an end. No, because what we need to do is just transition in some cases. We need to keep our skills up. You guys know about this. You're in economic development, for crying out loud. You're doing all kind of quantitative and qualitative research into what the companies in your area not going to need today. I mean, that's part of what they're going to need tomorrow, right? And you're getting more and more sophisticated. There's more and more software out there to help you do that. But the number one fastest growing occupation, if we were live, I would poll the audience right here in real time, but I'll just cut to the answer. The answer is solar panel installer. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is the occupation that's growing the fastest. Another personal exercise. I used to do this with my students at UCLA. Ponder, write about, think about, go off over here at Starbucks and have a cup of coffee, right? And ponder where you want to be in 10 years and write about it. Oh, powerful, powerful. I would have my students, they say, this was such amazing exercise. I never think about that. I think about what I'm going to do at lunch or whatever. So here's a little formula from your host today. Hindsight plus insights equal foresight, right? Hindsight, of course, is history. We are suffering massively right now because people did not learn from history, the history of pandemics. We had double handfuls of SARS and MERS and M121 or whatever the heck it is, right? We had benchmarking of how to navigate it, but we didn't have hindsight. George Santayana, the great historian, forget through are condemned to repeat their history, and we are repeating that right now in a very painful way. That's what's going on because we didn't learn from history. Hindsight, history, your insight, how you trend watch, how you take in information, your information diet. Is it anemic? Is it thin? Is it just information coming at you on the phone here a little bit and just dancing around? Or are you doing deep dives? Are you really grokking a certain topic? This, if you do it, if you look at history and combine that with insight, it will give you better foresight. Foresight is so extremely powerful because it gives you a leg up in better decisions. Look at how COVID is just accelerating trends. Workplace diversity, working from home, telemedicine is exploding. The living wage movement has just taken off. Shopping online, of course. Home improvement. People are looking around, working at home and spending more time at home and going, hey, this place is a dump. Let's do some things. Let's fix it up. Industry consolidation, right? Reshoring, etc. Be observant. Keep your antenna up even if you're confined to barracks. Look at how values are suddenly changing. I mean, a year ago, when Nike went in support of Colin Kaepernick, right? People said, oh, that's going to hurt the stock price. But now they seem prescient, right? Look at how things are changing so fast, from feeling in control and safe in our environments and in our ability in the United States of America to go out and about without worry and question, now to feeling out of control, unsafe. From shareholder value to stakeholder value, from unskilled workers, those people over there, those faceless people over there who clean our offices and who make our food and service at McDonald's and other places, to essential workers. Whoa, that's a whole different ring to it. From social responsibility hype, every company is telling you what a good guy they are, right? To social responsibility action. As I mentioned, when I began this year, I published my list of 20, what I call driving forces of change. Now, driving forces change over time, but they are longer in duration and deeper in impact. Here is that list. We don't have any time to really go for it and explore these because of the crisis of the pandemic and the economy. But please keep your eyes on these, right? They're shifting and they are important. I would love to have time to share them with you. But we need to be thinking in terms of not only the next opportunity, but the next crisis. We all know what that one is going to be. We just don't know how it's going to manifest. But the president recently commissioned this report from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. This was just reported in the New York Times, I think a week or two ago. But they're issuing dire warnings about how climate change's impact on our economy could be the next crisis, right? I mean, it already is. I'm out in California here, right? If I could share with you the kind of skies that we're having, the kind of ominousness that is in the air, right? We don't know. I mean, right now the weather looks pretty good, but a fire could break out and just become another Holocaust. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You have your hurricanes, your tornadoes, and so forth in the southeast to contend with. But all of these things are being caused by climate change and the time for denial, right? We saw that it didn't work with Nokia. We saw it didn't work with the disrupted companies. We saw that it didn't work with the United States of America and the great CDC, right? People used to call in from all over the world, epidemiologists, hey, we got this problem. What do you think we should do? They were the gold standard, right? Nobody calls anymore because that organization has failed to change, rapidly enough. And the climate will present equally a challenge. Fourth and final strategy here, and then we're going to take questions. We're going to go into more of a participative mode. Strategy 4 here is using our creativity and innovation to surmount any challenge. Using our creativity. What is creativity? What is innovation? Creativity is coming up with ideas. So each and every one of the things that you've accomplished, right? Somebody told me, I think it was Daryl, told me the other day, he said, you know, I've created or helped to create about 3,000 jobs in my area. That took a lot of creativity. So what is the difference? Creativity is coming up with ideas. Innovation is bringing those ideas to life. Think about that for just a moment. When you bring an idea to life, I mean, it's a great and noble thing to have an idea in the shower, have an idea on your way to work, right? And it's what you do with that idea, though. It's the people that are going to be of extreme value, extremely in demand, right? You're going to be unstoppable if you embrace this notion that you are in charge of innovating, bringing to life, right? Every great idea was brought to life. Look at the obstacles that one has to overcome to get any innovation out there. I once interviewed Art Fry, the guy that did the Post-it note. He says, you know, it's not really an innovation until it catches on with people, right? If the Post-it note that he invented had gone nowhere, they'd canceled the product, that wouldn't have been an innovation, right? I look for creativity everywhere I go. And in the early days of the crisis, go back in time and remember just the panic, the sadness, the fear that was just almost palpable. Healthcare workers were suddenly on the front lines where their family's going to be in danger here, right? And so they started dressing up in these kinds of outfits, and someone, the good-heartedness, the creativity to say, you know, this patient who may in fact never leave this hospital will never know who I am behind all this paraphernalia. And so that person started taping a picture of themselves onto the outer garment so that that patient could say, oh, this is you in better times. That wonderful smile that you have there, those beautiful eyes, right? That was everything in these encounters. And that was creativity in action. We look at the state of Georgia, all of these things, what do they have in common? The airport, the seaport, the highway system, technical college system. Every single one of these things was an idea in somebody's brain at some point, right? And everything that can be invented has not already been invented. This is our time at bat. Our time is now. I had the great pleasure over the last 30 years of working, as was said, in over 50 countries around the world, with all cultures and all people from every department, every area. Economic development have been in Singapore and Morocco and so forth. This was just a typical day in the life. It happened to be in Bahrain, where it was about 150 degrees outside, but a very nice climate inside with this group of mostly IT people. But we're launching, in this case, it was a innovation initiative. We were launching a new way to do innovation at this mobile phone company. This is what I get to do. This is what I love to do, because you see the light bulbs going on with people. We do a lot of exercises. These exercises, they're great for kind of instilling confidence in people that, hey, I can do this thing, this innovation, right? So it's kind of a step-by-step thing that we've evolved here. But you are doing innovation things all day long in your family, right? Hey, we got this problem. Let's come up with a better solution here, right? So I'm going to give you some techniques, some things that are very, very practical. Some of them are from this book, Innovation is Everybody's Business. Again, in the interest of time, I would love to share these stories. What we did was we went out and, the books on Steve Jobs and all the great Edisons but we went out to the people who, are not necessarily on the magazine covers, but are doing important things, innovative things within their companies. People like the guy top middle there, Filippo Passarini, with Procter & Gamble. He figured out a way to take $1 billion in cost out of Procter & Gamble. Not bad, huh? Or Sue Kinnick, the gal with the glasses in the second row. Sue Kinnick worked at the VA hospital, right? They said, we've got all these medication errors. Sue, you and your team figure out how can we reduce medication errors. People are dying from being double medicated, over medicated here. It's a problem. And Sue Kinnick was just intent on not doing some stupid report, but actually making a dent in that problem. And she's at the Seattle airport. I get a little emotional here, but she's at the Seattle airport turning in her rental car. And she sees how effective they are using barcode. I mean, this is going back a few years, folks, but she's seeing how effective they're using barcode to keep track of all these cars. And she says, why can't we use barcoding on patients to make sure they don't get over medicated or poorly medicated, right? So now, of course, this is less of a problem, but she went and got that idea through the VA hospital system. Folks, if you can get an idea through the VA hospital system, you can get an idea floating anywhere. Trust me on that. So we wrote about these people. We wrote about what we call their innovation skills. You've got them. Just need to dust them off sometime and work to improve them. See where we're strong. See where maybe we need a little improvement. I'm going to bang through these really, really fast. These are just what's going on as we see it. But I want to get to the personal here. I want to ask you a question as we come on to the end of this. When and where do you do your best thinking? Are you paying attention to there's got to be a better way moments? Are you downloading your ideas? They're like butterflies. If you don't download your ideas, folks, they're going to flutter away. Are you assaulting your assumptions? Are you assaulting your assumptions? Are you following the pizza rule where if you're forming a team to do some important innovation, you know, keep it small, right? Keep it small. So that's about all we have time for. I want to just take these down.